Some gifts are not wrapped in silk paper, no ribbon, no applause, and they don't arrive at the moment people expect. But when they do arrive, you know this one thing for sure: this is not random. For Libra, the gift that's coming doesn't need to be loud. It doesn't need to prove anything. It simply stands there, quiet, honest, like a light that's just bright enough to help you finally see the road ahead after walking through fog for a very long time. It may be recognition you once told yourself you didn't need, an opportunity you were afraid to take because you didn't want to disturb the life you had carefully built, or an offer that slows your heartbeat for a moment because deep down, you know you've been waiting for this longer than you ever admitted. Not everyone understands what Libra has walked through to arrive at this moment. From the outside, people usually see you as fine, balanced, composed, polite, reasonable, but few ever see how many times you swallowed your own emotions, how often you chose silence to keep the peace, how many times you stood between two sides and quietly placed yourself last, just so nothing would break. Libra learned how to endure beautifully. You endured through kindness, through telling yourself, it's okay, through believing that things would work out if you just tried a little harder. And you did try, not for a day, not for a year, but across a long journey where you learned how to stand without being held, how to keep moving even when your heart was full of unanswered questions. That's why this gift is not a reward for luck. It's recognition for a strength you sometimes forget you even have. It's here to remind you that none of your endurance was meaningless, that your patience was not wasted, that your constant effort to keep everything balanced has finally created something solid enough for life to place something worthy in your hands. At first, you may feel surprised, even doubtful. That's very Libra. When something good arrives, you don't rush toward it. You watch, you weigh it. You ask yourself if you're seeing it clearly. But underneath that careful hesitation, a familiar feeling begins to stir. A quiet knowing that says you don't need to prove your worth anymore. You only need to allow yourself to receive. And if you stay still long enough to truly feel it, you'll realize this is more than just a gift. It's like a door opening softly, not pushing you through, but wide enough for you to see that on the other side, there is more light, more space, and a version of you living in alignment with your true value. You may come to see that everything you've lived through, every moment you chose patience, every silence you held to protect balance, has been quietly rearranging your place in this life. No longer the one standing in the middle to absorb the tension, but the one finally placed where you belong. A place where you no longer have to trade yourself just to keep everything calm. And from that moment on, many things begin to change. So gently that you only realize it after you've already traveled farther than you ever thought you would. And then you begin to notice something quietly strange. Not that life suddenly shifts direction overnight, not that everything becomes perfect all at once. The change arrives in a much subtler way. It's like waking up very early in the morning. The light hasn't filled the room yet, but you know for certain that something has changed. The sky feels different. The air feels different. Even your own breathing feels different. Old habits no longer feel worth holding on to. Those familiar reflexes that once made you automatically step back, automatically stay silent, automatically say the gentle thing just to avoid conflict, they begin to slow down. Not because you've become cold, not because you've become selfish, but because a new question starts to rise inside you, soft, yet unmistakably clear. Is this really still necessary? Libra has lived for a very long time as the one who holds balance for everyone else, standing in the middle, arms stretched to both sides, trying to make sure no one gets hurt, trying to make sure nothing spirals out of control. And for a long time, you convinced yourself that this was the right thing to do, that giving up a little of your own feelings for the sake of collective peace was the mature choice, that as long as everything stayed calm, it was okay if you took the loss. But there is a truth you only allow yourself to face once you are tired enough. That sense of calm was sometimes built on you shrinking yourself. That harmony often existed because you were the first to let things go, the first to apologize, the first to accept less. And deep inside, There were parts of you set aside for so long that you almost forgot what it feels like to stand as an equal. Old cycles don't always end with a loud slam of a door. Sometimes they end very quietly. One day, you no longer feel the need to explain yourself so much. You stop straining to prove that you're easygoing, that you understand, that you're fine. You begin to choose silence, not as endurance, but as a way of listening to yourself. You begin to say no without guilt. You begin to step away from situations that drain you, even when you once stayed just because you didn't want anyone else to feel uncomfortable. What's surprising is this: when you stop trying to keep everything together at all costs, your life doesn't collapse the way you once feared. Some relationships change shape. Some distances naturally appear. But in those spaces, you begin to breathe more deeply. You begin to feel your boundaries clearly, not as walls, but as gentle outlines, strong enough to protect what truly matters inside. You are no longer trapped in the role of always understanding everyone else. Not because you've lost your empathy, but because you've learned that empathy must move in both directions. You were not born to be a shelter for everyone while having no place to rest yourself. And when that realization settles in, a very real sense of relief spreads through your body, as if you've just set down a weight you carried for so long without even noticing. From here, your choices begin to shift, just slightly. You move more slowly, but with greater clarity. You choose what makes you feel respected, not merely accepted. And within that quiet change, a new feeling emerges, not loud, not dramatic, but deeply steady. The feeling that you are no longer living just to keep everything calm, but are finally beginning to live to keep yourself whole. And as you begin to live more fully with yourself, a very subtle shift takes place on another level of life. Not loud, not dramatic, but clear enough for you to notice that whatever you allow within will soon reflect outward. Libra is no stranger to the idea of value. You've always known what is fair, what is worthy, what deserves respect. There is just one thing. For a very long time, you applied that sense of fairness to everyone else, except yourself. You became used to giving more than you received, used to keeping everything running smoothly, even when your effort went unnamed, used to choosing safety because at least it spared you from facing disappointment one more time. But when your inner world changes, the way you stand in this world changes with it. You begin to look at what you're doing through a different question, not whether it works, not whether it's acceptable, but whether it truly reflects your value. There are paths you've walked for too long, simply because they were familiar. Choices you repeated not because they were good, but because they didn't frighten you. And now, for the first time in many years, you allow yourself to consider a different direction. Not as an act of recklessness, but as an act of honesty. The financial energy surrounding you in this period doesn't feel like luck or chance. It feels more like a current of water waiting to be guided into the right channel. When you stop diminishing your own worth. When you stop accepting arrangements that quietly wear you down. When you allow yourself to say, this effort deserves more than this, the flow begins to shift. Not instantly, but unmistakably. You may notice that your relationship with money is beginning to change. It's no longer just about earning enough to feel secure. It becomes about building a foundation that reflects your true ability and your growth. You might do things a little differently than before. You might explore a new approach, a new role, or make a decision you once dismissed because it didn't feel safe enough. But this time, you are not moving from impulse. You are moving from deep self-understanding, from knowing what you bring to the table, and from knowing what you are no longer willing to trade away. What's interesting is this: when you change direction from within, external opportunities begin to find you naturally. No chasing, no competing, no over-explaining. Simply by standing in the right place, what fits you begins to move closer. Money, in this sense, is no longer just a number. It becomes a signal that you are starting to be compensated not for the role you forced yourself to play for years, but for the person you have grown into. And through this process, a quiet feeling begins to grow. The feeling that real security no longer comes from clinging to the old path. It comes from trusting yourself enough to step into a new one. a direction where you don't have to sacrifice your inner balance in exchange for material stability. A place where you begin to realize that when you honor your own value, life learns how to honor you in exactly the same way. And once you begin to believe that you deserve something better, a very familiar thought quietly returns. But this time, it doesn't carry the same weight. The thought that you're still not ready, that something is missing, that if you wait just a little longer, everything might feel clearer, safer, more complete. Libra has lived with that thought for so long that it became part of your breathing, waiting for the right timing, waiting for the right conditions, waiting for every piece to fall perfectly into place before allowing yourself to move. But life doesn't work that way. It doesn't wait for you to feel perfect before opening the door. It responds only when you begin to move. And maybe right now, the most important question isn't whether you're fully prepared, but whether you're willing to trust yourself one more time. Libra sees every angle of a situation very clearly. You think carefully. You look ahead. You can already imagine the possible outcomes. That's what gives you depth, but it's also what can keep you standing still for too long. You wait until your heart feels certain. You wait until everything around you feels stable. You wait until your choices no longer affect anyone else. And while you're waiting, time quietly keeps moving. There is a gentle truth that needs to be spoken. There is no moment when everything is perfect. There is no day you wake up without fear. There is no decision that comes without a trace of uncertainty. But there is also no path that opens for someone who only stands back and watches. Life tends to favor those who are willing to step forward while they are still learning how to trust. Starting now doesn't mean rushing. It simply means you stop postponing yourself. It means allowing yourself to try, even without all the answers. It means accepting that clarity often appears only after you've already taken a few steps. Libra doesn't need to change an entire life in one day. You only need to change a perspective, one small choice, one action you once set aside because you believed you weren't ready. Maybe it's a conversation you've delayed for too long, a decision about work you kept telling yourself could wait, a dream you quietly put away because you thought its time had passed. When you begin to move, even slowly, something strange happens. Fear doesn't disappear, but it no longer controls you. Uncertainty is still there, but it's no longer powerful enough to stop you from living in alignment with what you know matters. Movement carries energy. It awakens parts of you that have been sleeping for far too long. It sends a clear signal into the world that you're ready to participate again, not as the one who keeps everything calm, but as someone living honestly from their own values. And once that signal is sent, responses begin to appear, not immediately, not always in the way you expected, but enough for you to know you're moving in the right direction. Libra was never meant to stand on the sidelines of their own life. You were meant to step into it with grace, with a heart capable of deep love, and with an inner strength forged through years of waiting. Now, instead of waiting for everything to be perfect, you begin to trust that your movement itself is what allows life to slowly become whole. And as you keep walking, step by step, a deep sense of calm begins to spread. The feeling that you're no longer chasing an ideal version of yourself, but quietly becoming the truest version of who you are, right here, in this moment. And once you allow yourself to move, once you step out of the familiar cycle of waiting, a very sensitive place within you begins to be touched. It's the place you closed off after disappointment, the place where you promised yourself you would be more careful, more guarded, less hopeful, so you wouldn't have to hurt again. Libra understands this feeling deeply. You don't lack the ability to love. What you've been missing is the sense of safety required to open your heart. The connection that's coming doesn't arrive with noise. It doesn't enter your life through grand promises or dramatic gestures that make your heart race from the very beginning. It arrives like a quiet afternoon when the light tilts just enough to soften everything around you. At first, you might feel uncertain. You might wonder why you don't feel overwhelmed, why everything seems so calm. But it's within that calm that something very different is forming. Libra has been used to relationships that required you to tense yourself just to keep balance. Used to reading other people's moods, adjusting yourself, giving a little more so things wouldn't tip. This time is different. You don't need to become more agreeable to be allowed to stay. You don't need to speak less or give more to keep the connection alive. Things move slowly, but every step is steady, as if two people are looking in the same direction, without pulling, without pushing. There may be moments when you feel the urge to retreat. Old memories surface quickly, reminding you of times you trusted and were disappointed. You might feel the instinct to create distance, to put on familiar armor to protect yourself. But this time, that instinct comes with a new awareness. That fear is not always intuition. Sometimes, it's just the echo of wounds that haven't fully healed yet. This connection doesn't ask you to rush. It doesn't pressure you to make big decisions right away. It simply invites you to stay long enough to feel, to stay with conversations that don't require constant explanation, to stay with the feeling of being heard without having to justify yourself, to stay with a steady, consistent presence that you may not have experienced very often before. Libra tends to walk away at the first sign of imperfection. You learn to protect yourself by noticing problems early, but not every flaw is a warning. Not every difference is a threat. Some connections need time to reveal their depth, like a river that isn't powerful at its source but grows wider and stronger the farther it flows. If you allow yourself to stay, not blindly, but with mindful presence, you begin to realize something important. That love doesn't have to cost you your balance to prove its meaning. That the right connection allows you to remain yourself, to keep your own rhythm, to honor your boundaries, and still feel respected within shared space. Perhaps the most healing part isn't how perfect this person is, but the fact that you no longer have to shrink in their presence. You don't have to guess what to say to be accepted. You don't have to sacrifice essential parts of yourself to keep the peace. You simply get to be present, honest, real, and trusting that not everyone who enters your life comes with the intention to hurt you. And as you slowly allow this connection the space to breathe, the time to grow, a warmth begins to spread. The feeling that some relationships don't come to test you again, but to remind you that you are worthy of peace. That love is not a battle to win, but a place where you can finally set down the armor you've carried for far too long and simply be there as who you truly are. And right in the moment you begin to feel that peace, an old reflex quietly returns, like a familiar hand resting on your shoulder. The reflex to be more careful, to keep a little more distance, to close your heart just enough in case things don't turn out as you hoped. Libra has lived with this reflex for so long that sometimes you mistake it for wisdom. You learn to step back, to observe closely before offering trust. You created a safe space for yourself where no one could easily reach your most vulnerable parts. You built your life carefully, layer by layer, strong enough that nothing could easily shake it. And in many ways, you did well. You survived. You stayed steady. You were no longer pulled into emotional storms the way you once were. But that stability sometimes came with a very quiet cost. The feeling of standing still, not hurting more, but not moving forward either. Not losing much, but never quite reaching the potential you know you carry inside. Over time, that protection becomes a heavy armor. It keeps you safe, but it also wears you down. And deep within, a small voice begins to whisper that maybe you weren't meant to live forever in a state of defense. Releasing that armor doesn't mean throwing every door wide open. It doesn't ask you to trust instantly, to give everything away, or to place your entire life into anyone's hands. What's being invited here is far more subtle, the ability to open selectively, to know when to step forward and when to pause, not from fear, but from a clearer connection to yourself. Libra has a finely tuned sense of balance, but you've often used it to adjust yourself for others. This time, that intuition turns inward. It helps you tell the difference between a healthy boundary and a wall built by fear. Boundaries allow connection to grow, with respect. Walls keep everything out, including what could be good. You might begin to let yourself stay present in moments that once made you want to withdraw. You might try saying what you feel instead of carrying it alone. You might stay with an unclear emotion a little longer instead of closing the door just to feel safe. These small experiments do not make you weaker. They remind you that real strength is not never being hurt, but being able to heal and open again after what you've been through. New opportunities don't knock on doors that have been sealed shut for too long. They look for spaces soft enough to receive, aware enough to choose, and brave enough not to let the past decide the future. As you begin to loosen your armor, little by little, you realize that not everything you've built is as fragile as you once feared. Some things are strong enough to open the door without falling apart. And through this process, a deeply human feeling begins to rise. The feeling that you don't have to play the strong one all the time, that you're allowed to need others, allowed to lean on something beyond yourself without losing who you are. When you allow softness to walk alongside strength, life begins to respond with opportunities that don't require you to sacrifice your peace in order to move forward. And as you begin to loosen that armor, a very quiet moment appears. No drama, no warning signs, just the feeling of standing at a familiar crossroads in your life where you can clearly see two paths opening in front of you. Neither one is wrong. Both have a reason to exist. And that's exactly why this choice reaches so deeply. One path feels familiar. You know where it leads. You've walked it long enough to understand its rhythm, its limits, what it gives you, and what it quietly asks you to leave behind. This path doesn't threaten you. It offers stability, enough safety to spare you from facing too many unknowns. If you keep walking, here, you'll be fine. You'll stay balanced. You won't lack much, and no one could blame you for choosing it. But alongside it, another path begins to open, quietly. It's wider, more open, not outlined by clear lines or guarantees. This path doesn't promise safety at the start, but it carries something very real. The feeling that if you walk there, you won't have to shrink yourself. You won't need to adjust who you are to fit into an old frame. You get to bring all of yourself with you. Your softness, your strength, your depth, even the dreams you once set aside because you believed they weren't practical. Libra often chooses the path that causes the least disruption. You're used to keeping things balanced, even when that balance requires holding back your bigger desires. But there comes a moment when the old balance can no longer nourish you. It keeps you standing, but it doesn't allow you to grow. And deep inside, you begin to feel a very gentle call. Not demanding, not urgent, just an invitation to live in alignment with the potential you've always known you carry. That potential isn't about doing more or trying harder to prove your worth. It's about choosing a life that reflects who you truly are, daring to step beyond the version of fine and move closer to the version of whole, daring to believe that you weren't born only to keep things from falling apart, but also to create something more meaningful, more honest, more in rhythm with your own heart. This turning point doesn't ask you to give everything up at once. It only asks for honesty. Honesty about what you truly want. Honesty about the quiet feeling that if you continue as you are, you'll be fine, but part of you will always wonder what might have happened if you had chosen differently. And sometimes, that very question is what makes it impossible to return to the old way of living. When you stand at this crossroads long enough, you realize that fear doesn't come from the new path. It comes from missing yourself. And in the moment you allow that thought to settle, a gentle clarity appears. Not a final answer, but a steadier feeling in your chest. The feeling that no matter what you choose, you are no longer choosing from fear. You are choosing because you've begun to believe that your life can be larger than what you once allowed yourself to imagine. And as you stand there, between just enough clarity and a fear that has finally softened, something important begins to come into view. Not a grand promise, not a future already drawn out for you. Just a simple truth, quiet but deep, that everything unfolding in your life right now has a reason. Not to test how much more you can endure, not to see how long you can keep holding back, but to make up for the years you lived in silence, the years you spent trying to keep everything balanced for everyone else, except yourself. Libra has never been very comfortable with receiving. You're used to giving, used to smoothing things over, used to standing in the middle so nothing tilts too far. Even when life brings something good, you hesitate. You wonder if you truly deserve it, if you've done enough. But this season no longer asks you to prove anything. It simply invites you to pause, to take a deep breath, and to allow yourself to trust your intuition, the voice that has whispered the truth many times but was pushed aside by logic. To allow yourself to move forward, not recklessly, but in quiet agreement between your heart and the wisdom earned through lived experience. To allow yourself to receive what comes, not with suspicion, but with respect for the person you have become through everything you've survived. You may begin to realize that receiving does not make you weaker. On the contrary, it closes an old cycle, one where you were always the one carrying, the one yielding, the one keeping everything together. When you allow yourself to receive, you also give the world permission to meet you differently, more fairly, more gently, more in alignment with your true value. A new life does not begin with a dramatic turn that flips everything upside down. It begins softly, with choices you no longer have to force, with relationships where you don't have to shrink to fit, with work, paths, and rhythms that reflect who you truly are, not the role you once played out of responsibility. You'll feel this lightness in your own way, as if someone has quietly adjusted the scales inside you, no longer tipping towards sacrifice or endurance. Things begin to harmonize, not because you're trying to control them, but because you've stopped resisting your own flow. And within this new balance, you're no longer just existing to keep life from falling apart. You begin to live, to feel, to build, to be fully present. If there is one thing to carry forward after all that's been said, it is this. You did not arrive at this moment to learn how to endure. More, you arrived here to learn how to trust, how to receive, and how to live in rhythm with your own heart. When you allow that to happen, a new life begins to open, quietly, without spectacle, but deep enough, steady enough, and real enough for you to finally recognize that you have come back to where you truly belong.